get started in another minute. All right, Ray, should we kick things off?
Sounds good.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Yay. I'm excited it's Friday. It's been a long week, at least for me. Thank you, subcommittee, for joining us today. Also, we have Mr. Arthur Lucas from the city who is joining us today in place of Mr. Eric Howard, who had another commitment. So thank you, Mr. Lucas, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We are going to roll through our agenda. I'll introduce our guest speakers in a second, but thank you all for making time to join us on a Friday morning instead of our typical meeting time, Thursday evenings. We had to pivot a little bit since there was a city council meeting last night. So we had to pivot to make sure that we could have the technology to conduct our meetings. So thank you all for being flexible to shift to a Friday morning meeting. I will go ahead and read our COVID statement, our revised COVID statement. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and state of emergency, this meeting is being held via live video teleconference pursuant to 2020 Senate Bill 150 and in accordance with KRS 61.826 because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. All right. Shall we roll into the approval of the minutes? Any corrections that need to be made to the minutes that you all saw? If there are none, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes, please just wave your hand. All right. Any opposed? All right. Thank you. Motion carries. We have two phenomenal guest speakers this morning that are going to talk to us about two of the topics that we discussed at our last subcommittee meeting that we wanted some more information on. So for our first speaker will be Janet Beard with West Banco. She is going to talk to us about the Community Reinvestment Act, how that all works and kind of give us an overview. And she is open to entertaining questions after her presentation as well. So Janet, thank you for joining us. We're so glad to have you this morning. I know you're a busy, busy person. So we're glad you made time for us today. And you feel free to unmute yourself and begin when you are ready. You are still muted.
Hey there, how about that?
Perfect.
Can y'all hear me? All right, Shayla, thank you so much, you and Ray as well, for the invitation to come and speak today. What an honor it is to be before you all. And as Shayla mentioned, we spoke a little bit last week about it. I hope what I'm able to share, many of you may already know a lot about the Community Reinvestment Act, but hopefully what I'm able to share, and I thought what I would do is kind of break it down in three different parts for us to make sure, number one, that we understand the purpose of the CRA, kind of some parameters around the CRA, what it all means. And then lastly, from a public perspective, what does it mean to us and why should we really care about the CRA? So first of all, just kind of jumping into that and thinking about the purpose of it, the Community Reinvestment Act is a law that was passed back in 1977 to encourage financial institutions to help meet the credit needs of the community, including low and moderate income neighborhoods. And of course, it has to be consistent with safe and sound banking operations. There has since been several revisions of the law, but mainly that law was put into place to prevent redlining. And redlining was a practice where banks refused to lend in certain neighborhoods, and that could be based on race, ethnicity, or even income. So that was the purpose of that law being put into place. Some of the parameters around it that you may or may not be aware of, the CRA requires federal regulations. So, and those regulations basically to evaluate and to assess how well a financial institution is actually fulfilling their obligations to meeting the credit needs of the community in which, that they do business. So this evaluation or test, if you will, is called a CRA evaluation or CRA performance evaluation. And there are tests for small banks, large banks. There's a lot of different things in there, but there's tests for the banks, and they include or they cover a bank's activities as it relates to lending, investments, as well as the service activities that they provide in a community. A financial institution can receive one of 4 ratings, and the highest rating that a bank can receive is outstanding. And that's where everybody wants to be, is at an outstanding rating. That says that this bank is a leader in their activities. It says that they're doing it, they're performing at a high level. Again, the highest rating that you can receive. And then there's satisfactory is the next rating. That's where the majority of banks across this country land, is in that satisfactory rating. And basically that is saying, satisfactory says, hey, you're consistent, you're doing, your activities are adequate, and you are meeting the needs of the community. And then the next rating, no one wants to be here, but it's a needs to improve. And it says exactly, it means exactly what it says. That means we have some work to do. You didn't quite cut it. And we need to improve. And then the worst rating that a bank could receive is substantial non-compliance. And that just means you're substantially deficient in helping to meet the credit needs of the community. I will also add, because Shayla and I kind of talked about this, I touched on this with her. Another thing that I would actually add about that is every CRA examination, the examiners actually also look at the fair lending compliance. And so with that, what that means is if there is any evidence that there is illegal discrimination, that a bank has had any evidence of illegal discrimination, this could potentially impact whatever that overall CRA rating is. And they can technically downgrade that bank because of evidence of illegal discrimination. So why is that? So, because when you think of CRA is based on income level. And then you have the fair lending. So, but they work in, if you will, they work in concert with each other. When I think about it, if you think about it that way, one law is focused on the income level, the other law is focused on protected classes. So, but together, they promote that equal access to credit. And when you think about Lexington, when I think about Lexington, Fayette County, there are 30 low and moderate income census tracts in this community. There are 8 census tracts that are high minority census tracts. And so what does that mean? In 8 of those census tracts, the majority are the majority are minorities. So they're Black and brown people. And so again, when you think back to the original purpose of the CRA and redlining, banks have to make sure that we are lending, we're investing, and we're providing services to all of our census tracts, but especially when you've got high minority census tracts, got to pay attention to that. So going back to the ratings, a low or a failing grade for a bank has major impacts. It can impact the bank's ability to merge with other banks, to make acquisitions, and also to open branches. But more importantly, I think it can destroy a bank's reputation. So it's very important that we, that banks pay attention to when they are that CRA performance. And not only that, it's made public. And so, which leads me to the next piece, that CRA performance is public. And so I go back to that question, why should we care? Why should this committee, the subcommittee, care about that? Well, we should, because it's important for us to understand what or how our banks are meeting the needs of our community. And many are doing great work, really good work. I know we talked a little bit about donations, Shayla, but what I will add to that, so many people don't know the good work that banks are doing in the community. So there are your local donations that are made to nonprofits, but sometimes if the check is not big enough, you may not hear about it. Or if you didn't get to attend that luncheon, or you missed the news, you didn't see the ribbon cutting, you may not know that someone is investing, large dollars in an affordable housing project. But so there's so many components and so many pieces of it, and regulators look at a lot of different things that banks are doing outside of the donations. They're looking for innovativeness. They are looking for complexity in investments and things like that. So, some banks have community development arms attached to them where they're investing in low-income housing tax credits, helping to produce affordable housing. There are foundations that are connected to financial institutions. They're making large grants to our nonprofit organizations. There's also in-kind services. Some banks have their own products that are helping low and moderate income individuals by, providing just low down payments, down payment assistance. There's set aside money for down payment assistance. So there's so many things that are being done that we all may not know about. But one of the ways that you can see or understand what banks are doing is through that CRA performance evaluation. So I'll kind of close with this and then again, take any questions that you may have. So as the committee, as you're diving deeper into, understanding what banks may be doing in the community, one of the things, typically most banks have either a point of contact, they have someone within the organization that is either the point of contact or someone that's managing the CRA that can technically answer any questions you may have as it relates to what they are specifically doing in the community, as it relates to the lending, investments, and services. But then again, more important, I'll go back to the CRA performances. Those evaluations are published online, and they're published online through the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council. And in short, when you're looking for that, it's ffiec.gov. So that's the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council, FFIEC. You can go and you can search for a particular bank, if you will, and you can pull their most recent performance evaluation. And then lastly, upon request, you can actually go to your bank or a financial institution, and they do keep those on file, but upon request, they can get you a copy, because I will say this, don't go and print it. because you will find it may be 300 or 400 pages long, and you may not want to do that. So, but just keep that in mind as well. Upon request, banks are required, or they must provide a copy of that CRA performance to you. So I will kind of end there and then take any questions that you may have. And hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Janet. Does anybody have any questions for Janet?
I
Yes.
do. So, and be nice to me because I'm just figuring this out. So when banks have to keep records for reporting purposes, if I take that example of the 8 majority minority tracts in Lexington, do you keep that data by tract or by actual person who takes out the loan?
So basically it's tracked both ways. Because again, CRA is income. So, you know, if someone is 80% or below the area median income, that's tracked. Also from a geocoding perspective, geographically, yes, those loans are counted that way or captured that way just based on geographically where it was originated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Representative Brown.
Yes, Janet, thank you for a very thorough and condensed presentation. I know it's a lot larger than that.
It's a lot larger.
But your presentation, can you provide that to us, hard copy or online? Because, this has been outstanding. And for our communities, the need to know and to be able to figure out how to navigate through this so that we can get the best benefit for the citizens in our community. I've heard about CRA and that banks have a responsibility to the communities.
Right.
And I guess a follow-up question, and maybe you can't answer this, but I'm concerned about how our banks are doing in Fayette County and in Central Kentucky. I think that access to capital is a clear and present danger to people of color in certain census tracts, and probably some of what is happening in terms of code enforcement and there being tax liens put on properties that people don't know and don't have access to be able to tap into the resources. So I'm concerned about how people find out. What can the city do to make sure that citizens in Fayette County and in Central Kentucky get this information?
No, thank you, George. I appreciate you and appreciate your kind remarks as well. So definitely, I'm happy to provide kind of like my talking points or what have you, or if we need something a little more formal, I'm happy to do that and get that to the committee as well. But George, you make an excellent point. And, you know, when we think about our community and especially, you know, our lower moderate income, our community, people of color, I think we've got to think broader. I think we have to also just more collaboration with your banks or, you know, our community-based organizations, local, state government, continue the conversation because we have to find a way to help people of color especially, to build wealth, not to strip it from them. The education, now that we're aware, the light bulb has come on, what do we do? And I think we all individually, you know, we think about where we are and then individually think about what can I do to make a difference? How can we make a difference here in Fayette County? Bringing people still to the table or to the Zoom meetings right now, but we have to continue to collaborate and work together to kind of break down some of these barriers.
Thank you. I think that's a part of what we said. I'm sorry, Harding. But part of what our conversation was in talking about going with this report and with this subcommittee and its work is that it's not something that we're going to be able to put a stamp on right now. This is going to have to be continuous.
Agree.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Janet. I had a quick question. It seems that the CRA focuses primarily on lending activity. Is there a similar standard or similar program for sort of basic retail banking activity? Just are you offering bank accounts to people in these same kinds of census tracts?
So not just lending, it's three-pronged. So you have lending, investments, and services. And under the service test, that's where you find, you know, your banking centers, the products that they're serving, banking centers in close proximity to low and moderate income geographies, that the services, people serving on boards, giving back to the community. Under that service part of the test, that's where you find exactly what you're mentioning there. I didn't go too much into the service side of it, but yes, it's definitely a three-pronged test from lending, investments, and the services.
So is part of the test a benchmark on what I'll say bank accounts offered to customers who fall below an AMI threshold?
Yeah, all of that is examined or reviewed, if you will. Do banks have products for, you know, that are meeting the needs for low and moderate income individuals? Are there, you know, specialty programs to help meet the needs of the community? So the answer is yes. And typically that's why you can look at any financial institution and you can see bank accounts that, you know, for someone that, you know, has great wealth down to, you know, no monthly minimum fee or debit card only type transactions or accounts, because we have to meet the needs of everyone in our community. So all those things are looked at. You're welcome.
Yeah, go ahead.
I echo our appreciation for you joining us this morning. I'm curious, as we look at crafting recommendations to the city about CRAs, what kind of guidance would you provide us in that?
I think it definitely has to start guidance. I guess what I would say, depending on how far you want to drill down recommendations, I think we may have to take some time to look at some of the performance evaluations. Now there are, according to the FDIC and for Lexington, now I'm talking just Lexington, as of June of 2019, that was the last update, there are 30 financial institutions. Okay, and you can find that under FDIC's website, under deposit share. So, you know, JP Morgan Chase has top market share here. Then there's Central Bank, that's number 2, and then Fifth Third is number 3. So, you know, maybe you start with the top 10 and look at those performance evaluations. Just kind of understand maybe what some of the gaps are. I think it's important too to talk to some of our nonprofit leaders, understanding what some of the needs are that maybe they feel are not being met in the community, so that we understand, we have a broader picture of, okay, so here's what we're doing, but here's some gaps. Now, what can we do to help fill the gaps? And does that mean bring the financial institution, these leaders to the table to have a broader conversation, so that we're all kind of walking the same path and trying to accomplish the same thing? I think we've always tried to do that. Banks have always tried to do that, but we're in different times. And just like this committee has been created as well. So I think it's a different conversation today than it was, you know, even 2 years ago. So I think we'd have to start there, looking at some performance evaluations and understanding what's being done. Talk to some of our nonprofit leaders to understand what are some of the things we're missing. And then how do we bring people to the table to help talk about how to fill those gaps?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
I guess I have just one more curiosity.
Yeah.
I know that there had been recommendations to, I'm going to say, modernize CRA recently. And I think within the affordable housing sphere, there's a lot of fears about what that modernization might
Looks
do.
like.
And I really don't, I cannot recall if those recommendations went into effect or not. But if you could provide just a little bit of insight around that, particularly if they have gone into effect and how that changes the CRA landscape from how it's been over the past 25 years.
Right. No, and you're exactly right, because there was some, and that was through the OCC that were making some changes. And I don't know at this point, I don't know if they've gone into effect. And that's just mainly because it's not in my wheelhouse right now. I still pay attention to it and follow it, but I can follow up on that and share that with, you know, Shayla or Ray to share with the committee as well. Yeah, but I know it was close if it's not already in place. It very, very close. So I'll make a note.
And I would just say, from my understanding and for the benefit of the subcommittee, my understanding is that some of those recommendations, particularly from the affordable housing sphere, were lessening the responsibilities for the historic redlining, and in a way that I would say weakened the linkage between CRA and that history.
And, okay.
And
Let
this
me
is-
do-
Can you all hear me? This is Renita. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good, good. Yes, the hi Russ. Yes, the CRA modernization has actually come into effect already.
Okay.
And to your point, Russ, yes, there has been a lot of criticism that it has limited even further the advances of serving low and moderate income communities, neighborhoods.
Here.
Thank you. And
You're
hello.
welcome.
Thanks, Renee.
Hello.
Everyone also joining us is Renita Rosa. She is from PNC in Louisville, and she's going to talk to us about opportunity zones in just a second. So thank you, Renita, for joining us.
No problem at all. And thank you, Janet, for talking about CRA, because I speak to it a little bit in
Yeah.
the presentation as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Renita. It's good seeing you too.
Likewise.
Are there any other questions for Janet before we let her go? All right. Thank you so much, Janet, for joining. Oh,
Thank
David,
you.
go ahead. Okay. You
I
want to make-
do.
Okay, go ahead, Representative.
I think in our report, we need to speak prominently to CRA and the outcomes or lack of outcomes in what is occurring in our community, because what we're talking about with gentrification and with affordable housing, there certainly can be an impact made by our lending institutions if they choose to, or if they follow the CRA. There's significant impact that can be made in our census tracts that are having issues. And I think that we need to lift this up in our report, the CRA, in our report to subcommittee report.
Okay. We can definitely add that. Anything else for Janet? All right, Janet, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
And you can just send any information to me or Ray, and we'll make sure we get it to
Okay.
you.
Awesome. I will do that. Thank you all so much. And thank you for
Thanks
the work
again.
you all are doing. Great work.
Appreciate it. Bye.
All right, we have Ms. Rosa from PNC in Louisville, who's going to talk to us about opportunity zones today. And Quinn, I'm gonna ask if can I share my screen with her presentation?
Yes, you should be good to go.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
All right, Ms. Rosa, whenever you're ready.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. PG Peebles actually connected me to Shayla. I understand that Lexington is deliberating on opportunity zones and whether or not to use this as a product to advance community development, specifically for low and moderate income neighborhoods. So next slide, please. So what is an opportunity zone? It is a very complex real estate transaction. First of all, the property has to be located in an opportunity zone census tract. And you can actually find out if your proposed development is located in that tract by going to the KYOZ website and type in the address. Opportunity zones also are available for operating business, although PNC does not have an appetite for working with operating business, and must be invested as equity. The property must have been acquired after December 31st, 2017, should be ready for substantial improvement and should be shovel ready. And what I mean by shovel ready is that you have site control, you have a development team in place, you've decided what the repurpose or reuse is going to be. You have your total development cost. You have your sources and uses of funds, and you have your operating pro forma because we want to ensure that the project cash flows. So the next slide, please. So Janet spoke about Community Reinvestment Act, and I work in the Community Development Banking Division of PNC, and we are premised on ensuring that each and every single one of our loans, investments, and services satisfy the Community Reinvestment Act eligible activity. And so what we've done is we have self-imposed a guardrail in which not only does your proposed project have to be located in a certified opportunity zone, it also has to meet CRA. PNC has received an outstanding rating for CRA ever since it came, ever since the CRA was established in 1977. So let's talk more about the eligible activities. So if there's a project that is proposing affordable housing, what that means is that 51% or more of the residents have to be low and moderate income, which means that their income needs to be 80% or less. Community service. If there's a project that you have, such as maybe a boys or a girls club, and you want to have that building to serve low and moderate income, then we have to justify that the respective location is predominantly low or moderate income, and that the community service satisfies at least 51% or more low and moderate income residents. Another example is a twist on this one. So if your proposed project is mentioned in a downtown development plan or a respective neighborhood plan, and the input from the residents or stakeholders as part of that plan has specified and or recommended that what is needed is this particular development in this particular neighborhood, then it could also qualify as Community Reinvestment Act. So for a case in point, um, in Louisville, there is rather, Med Center, which actually works on a creation of medical devices, and it's located close to our medical center district. So it does not serve only low and moderate income um, residents or people or patients. However, it is located in a low and moderate income neighborhood, and it's also specified in a specific plan that the stakeholders wanted to repurpose a vacant building and have it centered upon entrepreneurial activity. Next slide, please. Okay, so the complicated structure, we've got a number of checklists to check off. Number one, when a developer comes to us and they have this proposed development, what's really critical is that there is a very well-defined exit strategy. This is a 10-year term, and basically we want a divorce after 10 years. So we want to ensure that this project continues to serve low and moderate income neighborhoods and communities. So we're looking for a deliberate, intentional thought of how PNC is going to remove itself from this partnership after the end of the 10 years. The legislative benefits actually transfer into financial benefits, in that those who are sitting on capital gains, if they invest those capital gains in low and moderate income neighborhoods, then they do not have to pay taxes on those capital gains. Appraisal gaps, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in the next slide as far as refi risk. So next slide, please. So here's a sample equity debt structure. We're looking here at a $10 million deal. And I'm going to qualify the percentages. So you have a managing member who will be the developer and the developer's team. And let's say they put $1 million into this development by way of equity. So this 10% actually should be reflected as a minimum of a 10% equity investment from a developer. Then PNC would serve as the opportunity zone investor, in which they would put in 70%, which should really read that PNC would put in a maximum of 70%. And then we have the debt piece that I mentioned that I was going to talk to you a little bit from the prior slide. The reason why PNC is including both a equity and debt structure is because the debt serves to mitigate a number of risks. So the next slide, please. So speaking of mitigating risk, PNC wants to be in first position on this. So that's why the debt piece is also included in the structure. And it also allows for various guarantees, completion, operating deficit, and if there are issues related to environmental, we want to ensure that we have environmental indemnification. Next slide, please. So here's the issue. The issue is both racial and historic. And given that we are currently experiencing 4 centuries of history in about 4 months, there is no doubt that African Americans, Blacks, have not had equity and or access to capital compared to our white counterparts, and that we were bought to America and we were real estate. So unfortunately, there is not nearly as much exposure to complicated real estate development transactions. So this slide is important in that, given that the Central Business District is a certified opportunity zone, and I understand from conversations with Mr. Holmes and EHI Consultants that most of that area is low and moderate income. What needs to happen is that there is a not-for-profit and or a Black developer with capacity to partner with a private developer who is mission oriented and also wants to serve for the advancement of mankind, low and moderate income neighborhoods. And so the silent investor that is noted here is an opportunity for a partnership with a private developer. So it could be, the structure could include a not-for-profit along with a private developer to advance the project. So next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the cost of this transaction. As I mentioned earlier, it is very expensive. Legal costs range from $30,000 to $50,000. When I spoke of the earlier slide of a minimum and a maximum, PNC's opportunity zone is structured that we will not exceed 90% loan to value. So if the appraisal comes in and basically states that when we look at the numbers that have been presented to us, if it exceeds 90% loan to value, then whatever the amount that exceeds happens is what the member developer or the member partner or investor has to bring to the table to get the loan to value back down to 90% or less. So that's why we also talk about the silent investor and really the need to partner, especially and particularly for African Americans and Blacks who have historically been excluded from real estate development, and particularly real estate development complicated deals such as an opportunity zone. So next slide, please. So I've gone over a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I would like for you to know that you can reach out to either me or my market manager, Deborah Berry Williams. If you have any additional questions regarding the opportunity zone, or if during your discussions as a subcommittee, you come across someone who is interested in how this product works and how they could find out a little bit more about how it works. So that's all I have. And I open the floor to questions. And Shayla, I'm assuming that you're going to make the presentation available. Okay, thank you so much.
I will
Thank
send
you.
it out to the subcommittee members today. Yes.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Rosa? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much for that. I will admit that my my interest in these kinds of things is far outweighed by my expertise or knowledge of them. So I appreciate your clear explanations. It seems like and rightfully focusing on the cost and the complication of these kinds of things. Does that, in your opinion, or your experience, limit the application of this kind of structure to relatively large projects?
Yes. And when we're saying relatively large, the total development cost that PNC does not want to exceed is $20 million. And what we've seen is, by way of our pipeline and the opportunity zone projects that have closed, they're averaging anywhere from 8 to 10 million.
Mm.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Other questions?
Hey, Renita, thank you
Hey,
so much.
hey, Russ.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, and I
Always
appreciate
a
what you and
pleasure.
your team are doing. And I actually just had a conversation with someone prior to hopping on this, in a for-profit developer looking at opportunity zone, and our conversation there was talking about that. I think the opportunity zone can be used as extractive capitalism and something that could be used to ripen communities even more so for gentrification. That's why I'm thankful for folks like you and your team that is helping to really season those investments, and with your all's longtime commitment there. So I guess I'm wondering, like, as you all have done opportunity zone investment, what have you seen in other areas of successful projects that don't cause displacement and that allow community members, existing community members, to be able to enjoy the benefit of those investments coming in?
Well, and yes, I have definitely heard that criticism as well. This opportunity zone was actually passed in 2017 as part of President Trump's administration. The intended goal is for access to capital for low income communities. And there has been discussion, which basically speaks to what I said earlier, which is identifying Black developers who are qualified, capable, already with access to capital to even begin to stick their toe in the water to talk about and propose their development. But what we've seen as a result of our self-imposing the CRA, that the gentrification has been comparatively less, and it has actually, in a couple of projects that we have nationwide, served to stabilize rather than gentrify African American communities where there wasn't any development before. Now, as we all know, when you come up with these big federal appropriations for advancing communities, such as the Hope 6 and now the Choice neighborhoods, that when you put multi-million dollars into an area, then more than likely what that is going to do is to stimulate private investment activity that was not there before. So there is not a guarantee that the neighborhood itself, as a result of such a large investment, is not going to change. My definition of gentrification is that you are displaced from your residence and you don't want to go. So ideally, if the city of Lexington would also put into a roadmap strategies that would offset a displacement of residents who do not want to leave, such as the community land trust adjacent to an opportunity zone project, then it will limit gentrification, yet still rebuild and redevelop a neighborhood that has been historically disinvested.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Other questions, comments?
I will just maybe lift up an example that I'm aware of, that I believe that Greater Charlottesville Habitat for Humanity is doing a pretty robust redevelopment project of a mobile home park using opportunity zone investments. And so that might be something I've tried to reach out to them before just to understand. I don't know, Rachel, if you would have some insights to be able to reach out to them and just get, maybe even understand, because again, for our task force, it's like, what kind of recommendations can we make to the city? And maybe to understand how the city is involved in that project as well.
And if this, right. And if Lexington, if the city government could actually assist in identifying mission-oriented, and I'm not saying that they want to make a profit, but that their priority is to advance low and moderate income neighborhoods over making a profit. If the city could identify those private developers who are interested in partnering with a Black-led developer, such as the Lexington Urban League, then that will heighten the chances of an opportunity zone transaction, because they're very expensive and they're very complicated.
I'm aware of the mobile home project. I didn't know they were
Hey,
using.
Rachel.
Hey, Renita. It's Old Home Week. I wasn't aware they were using opportunity zones. I have followed the mobile home park project since they began it several years ago, because I think it's a really interesting project and very focused on not displacing the people who are in the mobile home park, but transitioning the housing to quality, affordable housing and habitat homes, and the folks who live in the trailer park have access to that and staying there. It's a really cool project, but I can do a little looking and see what I can find out there, or talk to Dan.
Okay, great. I mean, as much information that you can find out regarding best practices will definitely advance your journey.
There's actually a TED Talk out there where he talks about this project that's several years old now, probably, but I'll see if I can find that link as well.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions of me?
Well, thank you, Ms. Rosa, so much for your time, your knowledge, and your expertise. We really appreciate it. I've learned quite a bit. I've got pages of notes here.
And again, if you would like to follow up with me, you know how to reach me.
Yes, and Kimmy, I will share her slideshow today. Yeah, and
Okay.
Russ,
Okay, great. Thanks.
thank you so much, Mr.
So much.
Thank you. Thank God it's Friday, everybody. Have a good one. It's a pleasure to meet everyone.
You too. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Any comments, questions, feedback? How we want to incorporate these in these two additional items or into our report? I know Representative Brown already said that we need to include the CRA, which I made a note of. Any additional comments, feedback regarding opportunity zone?
I think Russ asked the best question, which is where the actual models of where these have worked. I mean, I know they're only 2 years out, but just a quick search suggests that they pretty much benefit investors, and there aren't a whole lot of models without significant oversight that do the kinds of things we want to do. CRA is different. I don't know much about that. I'd take the points on that, but
I think with the CRA, I know earlier in the prior meeting, I talked about making a recommendation that the city
opportunity zones, I guess I'm not.
That the city review their banking relationships. And I think one of those recommendations could be that anybody that the city does banking with has to have an outstanding rating for CRAs. And I don't know I have no idea what that's like, but it at least reinforces the value that's there. And I think it's something that, what I heard her say was do a review and see how people line up, how the different institutions line up. And I think that's a minor thing that we could ask the city to do.
Mm-hmm.
Russ, I think that's a great point, man. I think that we can use the finances and the resources of the city to leverage moving forward with making capital available, because that has been an issue from the comments that I made a couple of weeks ago about not lending money to African Americans to buy money to buy a home or to purchase land. That was like in the 50s. 55 was when that was discontinued. So I think this is a great step for the city to really look at and leverage its assets.
I was actually wondering the opposite, if we shouldn't use it to leverage those with lower scores to give them opportunities to increase them by helping us.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to look at it too.
Your score is low, give us money and improve your score.
Yeah, no, I think you bring it. That's an excellent point, because I guess if there are already just doing things with outstanding, that doesn't change the landscape very much. I think where there's impact for growth is, as you're suggesting, Rachel. So thank you. Yeah.
It's quite the motivation.
Any other comments, feedback?
I just go back to the opportunity zone piece and it is what I've heard as well, both as criticism, is that opportunity zones largely benefit the investor. And oftentimes those investors aren't in proximity to the communities where the investments are happening. And so I think whatever the city can do to develop that local capacity, that investment capacity, or incent that, is just, when I talk about, like, I use the language seasoning the investment so that it does benefit communities in ways that existing community members reap the benefits of that. So, but I get a sense that there needs to be some capacity building happening locally to make that happen.
I think perhaps our recommendation could go in our Office of Housing, however that fleshes out, that there needs to be a deep dive into both of these programs to figure out the best way to maximize and utilize them if possible.
I like that. It's not an immediately actionable thing, but we certainly wouldn't want to write off the possibility of opportunity zones. I mean, because I have intellectual ADHD, I'm just like surfing the web while she's talking and finding the example of Arizona State, which brought together a governance consortium that included tribal leaders and Latinx representatives from the community and academics to sort of at least explore how you might take advantage of this. And we certainly could do something like that in the long run, but it's not going to happen next week.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned early on, the Neighborhoods in Transition Task Force, we're in the unique position that certainly we can, things that do not have enough time to develop or study, we can certainly pass off to them for further research and action. So,
yeah.
I know some of you are enthused about that.
I think this has been an interesting exercise and overlap in the work that the task force has done. And clearly some of the work done by the task force has informed this group, and certainly the task force work will be very much informed and supported by this. So it's a good overlap.
So have we come up with a recommendation? And I apologize for being late to the meeting, y'all, but did we come up with a recommendation for opportunity zones? Is it going to be, I guess, do more research on it, and then maybe look at the models that have been successful in other areas to prevent displacement? Because I think the scary side of it is, opportunity zone projects don't have to have that mission-centric vision to it, and I think that's what scares folks. So if we can, I guess, lay out a template, and maybe even with the city's affordable housing fund, if we can lay out some templates that they can use, or maybe even present to potential applicants of that funding, that may be a way to help ensure that this happens the way that neighborhoods need it to happen to keep people from being displaced.
Yeah, I've made notes, and I will add that to our working recommendations. Definitely. So expect another revised revision. But this is good. This is good.
it's not supposed to be growing. It's supposed to be, I'm just kidding.
I know. Ray, do you mind to take over? I'm writing some notes here.
Sure. If we're ready to move on to our follow-up items, which is 4A, which are community surveys. I've sent all the community surveys that we received in the mail so far, and Rachel masterfully re-edited this spreadsheet to make it a lot more user-friendly and easy to reference. Does anybody have anything they want to point out or discuss regarding the results of some of the surveys that we've received so far?
I just wanted to commend Rachel on putting all that together. My goodness gracious, Rachel, thank you so much. I was wondering when we were opening ourselves up to all these surveys, which of course we want to do so we can be responsive to input, how we were going to be able to review them. And Rachel, that made it extremely, extremely helpful. It was good for me to read over those and to really feel like there's definitely a meshing of what our community is telling us and the things that we're focusing on. There was one dovetail for me from the list of recommendations that Justin Kirshner sent us that I thought was outstanding. That whole document that he sent us just had some wonderful recommendations. but if I can just refer to a number in a letter, 2A, under his recommendations had to do with community input, and it had wonderful language about holding regular community input sessions to hear what the community is saying and to develop policies that align with that. I just feel like this was a wonderful exercise for us in trying to do that and wanting our recommendations to be responsive to what we're hearing. And I just wondered if we might want to find a way to include the language that he had in there as one of our recommendations, that this constant attentiveness to our community and what people are asking for is responded to with policy implementations. But Rachel, that was outstanding work.
Well, thank you, but I did some minimal formatting so I could read it. That was my goal. And then once I printed it out, I realized I should have done a little more, but happy to do that little bit to make it a little more accessible.
Yeah, and certainly that's something that we could add as far as the community feedback. I know when we were discussing in our regular Thursday meetings with all the co-chairs and chairs, that's kind of one of the concerns is once this report gets completed, holding the administration accountable to the recommendations, as well as where do we go from here and kind of continue monitoring. So there is some talk of maybe continuing with this commission once this work has been completed. And certainly that's something we can add as far as our recommendation is future town halls, or whatever you want to call them, listening sessions, to make sure the community input is received and continues to be received as far as what they do with these recommendations. So I think that's a good idea. Anything else on the surveys? They definitely ran the gamut to, nothing's going on, to, I found it interesting. There was a couple more about enforcing continuing anti-discrimination laws, all the way up to, hey, we need more policing, which is kind of interesting considering some of the other committees that we have and what they're looking into. So I appreciate everybody working to get these surveys out. It's definitely a good response to them. So I certainly think that we can utilize this information in crafting our responses. Anything else on the surveys before we move on to follow-up item, the next follow-up item? Okay. The next one, follow-up would be Dr. Shine was going to talk about equity overlay district. I'll turn it over to him.
Yes, I'm not going to say a lot, but I'm going to maybe twist a little bit. I looked at the equity overlay districts as I promised. Basically, it was something that was proposed in Austin. There's a lot been going on in Austin, Texas in the last year. It's mirroring a whole lot of what we've been doing. They had the advantage at that moment of being in a position to rewrite their code, sort of revisit their comprehensive plan. They proposed an equity overlay district. I think it's something to look into. They didn't do it as far as I can tell, and I can't find any other example, but the overlay district idea, I would suggest we might maybe suggest looking into it. It is one way to gather, to put focus on a particular district. And even if we don't do it, there's I think there's a symbolic moment that actually recognizes several things that are going in across our what are we calling them? Our recommendations, which is to recognize disinvested areas, recognize neighborhoods that are below a certain AMI, recognize neighborhoods in need. But more broadly, I also looked into the PDR stuff after being reminded by Representative Brown that he and I are the only ones old enough to remember it. The PDR and the service boundary stuff. I hate to do this, but I was actually going to suggest that we rewrite one of our first recommendations. I was really impressed with the stuff that came in with Mr. Kirshner, is that his name? I've been following with much interest Harding's sort of comments on zoning and on planning, and been doing some more reading myself. And I feel like we might even step back a little bit in our very first recommendation and not just jump into code, but actually ask the city to fundamentally reassess the role of planning, zoning, and coding in gentrification. And that would give us an opportunity to break it down into several categories, into the code enforcement one that we've got, into the question of zoning, into the question of the PDR program and the service boundary, and into the question of the possibility of an overlay, an equity overlay. I'd be happy to try to rewrite that if you wanted, rather than make you take all those notes. I don't know how you feel about that. I realize Ray just said we're supposed to be winnowing down, not adding on. But in there, I think, sort of laced through some of these questions, I feel like, and again, following Representative Brown's comments last week, I think we need to be careful, and now I'm just going to editorialize, this is just me. I think we need to be careful about conflating the service boundary and the purchase of development rights program. Service boundary has been around for a long time. I think there's pretty good evidence across the country that if we just expand the service boundary and we don't change our zoning, we're just going to get more R1 zoning and we're not going to fix anything. I think that the PDR program, by the way, I went back and looked through read all the original documents, the original reports, and looked through the newspapers at the time. There was never any discussion about race and equity with PDR. There was never any discussion that I could find about any kind of reinvestment in the inner city. I think that's come later through some of the kind of new urbanist Fayette Alliance kinds of politics, which recognize that if you want to get support, again, I'm editorializing, if you want to get support for green space preservation, you got to get recognize that you better focus on infill. The PDR program, by the way, has been funded in various ways. There was an initial bond fund for the city. George, you may remember this. I think it was at first 2 million and later 5 million. There was tobacco settlement money that was put into it. And at this point, it's run on a matching fund program with the federal government. I don't know how you tap into that money, but I do think that we might point out that the PDR program, I'd hate to be opposed to the PDR program personally, but I do think we can point out that there's an opportunity cost to the city. Or we could at least guilt people in saying, look, we've put in however many millions for a 50,000 acre preservation goal. Where's the similar kind of thing for inside the service boundary for our areas in need? We were willing to bond.
You on the road, Dr. Shine, you got froze.
20 years ago, we were well shut up. Did I fade out?
Yeah, you froze.
Ah, shit, sorry. That's a technical term. Sorry, where did I fade out?
We only something about bonding. We only lost about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. I was editorializing. I was just saying, look, we could call this city on the fact that we're willing to bond for PDR. Why aren't we willing to bond for our deserving neighborhoods inside the service boundary?
I think, if I may, just thank you, Dr. Shine, for that information. Going back, being old enough to remember how that happened and being in service at that time, the PDR is not something that was agreed upon by the citizens of Fayette County. It was supposed to have a vote, and the vote happened on council. They got enough votes with council members and the mayor, and it got passed, and it has never been revisited. I dare say if we ask 10 citizens of Fayette County what PDR is, there may be one, if we're lucky, that knows what that is overall in this community. And I think that we also need to be very clear about that the PDR, the companion piece of PDR, was supposed to be infill and redevelopment. And infill redevelopment has been the redhead stepchild or the baldhead stepchild of the purchase of development rights program. So I think that the city owes the community for the infill and redevelopment out of what has been done with PDR. It has never been equal and or fair. Thank you, Dr. Shine, for your research. Yeah,
I
that's
made
great.
a note from yesterday.
I agree. I gotta point out that some of my research actually involves like quoting George Brown 25 years ago on stuff and many things I've done. So I owe him a large debt.
I never voted for PDR either. I want that to go on record. I never voted for it.
No, but somebody made the comment in our main co-chair meeting yesterday. They were actually talking about the PDR a little bit, and somebody said that there was a recommendation or something that was like for every $5 spent on PDR, $1 was set aside for urban core.
Well, that was my recollection was that's what PG People said to us at one of our conferences. He suggested that ratio.
Okay.
Whether that was initially there or whether he was making a suggestion as a percentage, that's my recollection.
Okay.
I think David, I think he had said that was sort of originally on the table, and then it never got, as Representative Brown, it never actually got finalized. And I do like Richard's idea of asking the city to fundamentally reassess zoning and code and all that. What I might suggest is that we say, with these questions in mind, what is the, I mean, like housing code, is it there to penalize people, or is it there to create safe, health and safety for residents?
Safe and affordable housing.
Well, and is it also there to, really encourage developers to do the right thing instead of, like Harding's pointed out, just to be able to, to write a check to cut corners because they can afford to do that. And, and it may be Harding in an email suggested bifurcated. Maybe the code needs to be bifurcated. One is sort of a health and safety, human flourishing aspect, and then one is for developers and landlords to say, here are your rules. So I think the idea of reassessing is a good idea because that allows the foundation to be built, and then the work comes from there instead of tweaks here and there.
And I agree. I think Dr. Shine is right. I think maybe we just need to reassess planning's perspective and zoning's perspective in regards to how this impacts gentrification in neighborhoods that are the urban neighborhoods. The other thing is when we're talking about, I think when we're talking about PDR and how we match it dollar for dollar, I think some people would say that, the money that the city has invested in, say, the Legacy Trail and through downtown, the money that's been invested in the Affordable Housing Fund is kind of the match or the counterbalance. But I want to say that the infill dollars that we're talking about, I think needs to be more focused on infrastructure. It needs to be more focused on initiatives and projects that give folks that live in the urban neighborhoods an opportunity to either, I wouldn't say build wealth, but better stabilize themselves. And I know all those things, except maybe for the trail construction, but the affordable housing money is geared towards that. But I wouldn't want that to be counted in the equation that we're looking at, $1 for every PDR money, every PDR dollar ought to be used for infill efforts. I think it ought to be towards infrastructure and other type of projects, if that makes sense, because I think people will use that argument that, we are invested in the inner city, so we don't need to do more. I don't know if anybody can add to it or make it clarify kind of the point that I'm making, but
well, Councilman Brown, I have a question of maybe it's semantic, but when you say infrastructure, what do you mean?
One of the arguments that one of the points that people make is that it's it's less expensive or more cost effective to build houses on vacant lots, new construction, as opposed to redevelopment. You have to go in and take out old water lines, or you have to do all this stuff. So the cost to build and redevelop in the urban areas or the inner city is more expensive than just building on vacant lots.
The first cost maybe less. The ongoing costs is significantly more.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so we had an infill and redevelopment fund that we kind of set up, but we never put any money towards it. And it was to help or to go towards the cost for redevelopment initiatives in the urban areas. You know, so, I know a few projects that the cost went up because they had to do environmental remediation because of what sat on the property before. If it was a a certain type of business, they had to go in, do brownfield remediation or whatnot. So that's kind of the point I'm making, just to help lower the cost of doing infill and redevelopment in the urban areas as opposed to new construction. Yeah.
Totally agree with you there.
So I don't know if that's, and kind of the holistic approach to how planning and zoning looks at gentrification. I think putting all that into one recommendation makes sense, because even through the neighborhoods and transition task force recommendations, it's kind of spotty, the recommendations that we're making to the planning department to do this and to do that. So if it's one holistic recommendation, that makes sense. And then I don't know what is the best word to verbalize a suggestion about matching either, dollar for dollar or $1 for every $5 of preservation to infill and redevelopment. I don't know the best way to verbalize that or to state that recommendation, but I think it's worthy to have that recommendation.
I second that. I think that the opportunity that we have in having this discussion as this subcommittee, that I think we ought to seize it to make sure that we at least recognize. I know it's a lot of dollars. I think that PDR has spent probably upwards of $30 million of local, state, and federal dollars on the preservation piece. And probably, I mean, as far as improving the inner core, the infill redevelopment piece, I'm, as far as actual infill redevelopment that the people can feel and the people can see, has been minuscule by comparison.
Just as an aside, one of the reasons I like the reassess planning and zoning, and I know I'm just going to be careful because I know we're recorded, but I don't know any of the planners in the seat anymore. I used to years ago, but in my experience, most planners are pretty smart and they're pretty well trained, and they usually have some pretty interesting ideas and they know what's going on across the country. I was moved to think about this because I attended Fayette Alliance's lunchtime meeting the other day where they brought in somebody to talk about social justice and equity. And did any of you guys go to that by any chance? Yeah, you didn't miss anything. The guy who came in gave a kind of canned history of how planning works, and he missed one step, which is that basically starting in about the 60s or 70s, I would argue that planners kind of got written out of the equation in thinking about American urban development. With the sort of neoliberalization in the post-Reagan era, everything got privatized, and now we're all about market solutions. Witness our two discussions this morning, or two visitors this morning. Not to say that there aren't good market solutions, but I think that's what we've got with planning. And I feel in some ways we ought at least give our local planners a chance to sort of look at some of this stuff and think about it as well in a reassessment.
Kind of in that same vein, we have a comprehensive plan, and there are certain elements to in it that kind of encompass all of it: the preservation piece, the infill piece, and even the plan for development going forward. What I think one of my frustrations is that it gets rolled out in phases. So we have all this redevelopment taking place here, and we have this preservation here, but somewhere in the middle, and our planners we got a pretty sharp group of planners. They're smart people, and they have a plan for how all this works together and moves us forward as a city, but it's waiting on it rolling out in phases. And then it's, then you get public input, and then you get neighborhood input, and and some of the phases and some of the things that are coming are change, and people don't deal with change well. So for the big, for this whole puzzle to fit together, some things are going to have to change, but if the change that's needed for it to work based off of the feedback and the information that we got when we were putting the plan together, then it starts to, I wouldn't say it falls apart, but all the pieces don't fit together well. And it just, and I guess that's what, well, I guess I kind of summed up while we're having this conversation and why gentrification takes place. But, there's a sustainable growth committee that is going to play a huge part in how our city moves forward. And, that committee is behind schedule for several reasons. COVID's one of them, but, we need them to get together and start doing the work that they've been tasked to do to help us come up with a plan on how to move forward in regards to the growth and the plan for growth of our city. I guess I just kind of went on a ramble there, but we got some sharp people in planning, and I think there's a plan in place. We just got to make sure we're firing at all pistons so that it gets executed towards giving everybody an opportunity.
Okay. Anything
Yeah,
else? We have. Go ahead.
Let me just say one thing. I think Councilman Brown is right that there are sharp people in the planning office and who have innovative ideas about how to move Lexington forward. I think their cautiousness and their pace is a recognition of political reality. And for us to take substantive steps, I think that political reality either has to be recognized or it has to be changed. And to put, I think that the city hasn't put as much of its weight behind these kinds of issues as it could have. I think some of that is just, again, it's the political reality. Everybody's got priorities, and this just hasn't risen to the top so far. So that's just, I don't want people to think that they're being slow just because they're slow.
Okay. According to my clock, we got about 4 minutes left. Shayla, did you want to briefly talk about the back owed rent? That was the next one on the committee or on the agenda, or do you want to move on to the?
I'll just summarize for the viewing audience, since I contacted Art Crosby and with the Lexington Fair Housing Council, and I sent you all the information that he sent me, basically saying that they get about 100 intakes a week with their COVID-19 renter help. So far, they have about, as Ray reported before, about 1,500 families that have reached out to them. So that is continuing to grow. Average monthly rent for those seeking help is $740 a month. So doing the math, it's going to be quite a bit of money that is going to be owed in back rent. And he said about 44% identify as Black, 10% identify as Latinx or Hispanic. 273 of those seeking help identify as individuals with a disability. 48 individuals are veterans. This is going to be a huge issue. Renter help is going to really be needed once the moratorium is lifted.
Shayla, did I understand? Go ahead, Ray. No, please.
No, I just want to. He did send out a quick update this morning. It looks like August 24th at 9:30 a.m. is when evictions for non-payment of rent will begin in Fayette County. The court currently has 51 evictions scheduled for that day, and they're scheduled during a 1 hour period, which means court is scheduled a little more than 1 minute per family that will be potentially kicked out of their home. So that starts on the 24th. So that was a little update he sent this morning.
I'm gonna mute myself while I scream.
Hey, I got a kind of in that same vein as I just got word the other day that some of the early COVID funding that came to the city in regards to eviction prevention has just got released, I think a couple of days ago. So hopefully our Department of Community Service can start to get that money in folks' hands. So I'll be looking to share some of that information with everybody once it comes out. And then also the mayor and the council have also made it a priority, eviction prevention funding a priority. So I think right now, I know we have allocated $1.9 million towards residential assistance funding, but we're in the process of discussing how that's going to get into the hands of the folks that need it the most. So I think in the next couple of weeks, we should at least be presented with a plan or have some kind of direction on how to get that out. And I did reference this subcommittee, that issue being a priority of this subcommittee. And then I also got an update. The Sustainable Growth Committee is actually going to meet next Wednesday. So I guess somebody watching this meeting evidently has something to do with it. And
say some more stuff and make it happen immediately.
Yes.
Yeah, if somebody will pay off my home mortgage, that'd be nice. See if that happens. All right. Yeah, I just want to share those updates. Thanks.
I mean, I know it's still in the beginning stages, but any indicators that money will start to roll out before the 24th?
It has to.
Yeah.
Say, if we don't have time to make a plan, you got to.
Yeah. Now those are two different. Just for clarification, those are two different pots of money. I know the city already had like $500,000. They were waiting to get the green light to move on, and then the 1.9 is something different. And I guess the plan is, in regards to whether or not it's for utilities or rents, just because I think those criterias and who has the ability to get that money in folks' hands is different. And it may not be, it may not be the city. We may have to partner with somebody to get that money out to people. All right.
Well, it is 12:01. We were thinking this would be our last official meeting as a subcommittee. How do you all feel about that? Do you all feel like we need to reconvene next week to still flesh out some issues? Are we ready to start putting pen to paper? How do you all feel?
I feel like it's up to you and Ray on what kind of help you want from us. You're left holding the bag at this point.
Well, we hope to spread it around.
Okay.
But I know some folks have spoken up about what portions of the report they're interested in taking on. Do you all feel like we need to meet again? I wanted to touch that first. Or do you think we're ready to start kind of doing some formalized writing for this report? How do you all feel? Because we can meet again. The door is open for that.
What I think that the recommendations that we have is something that we can work on to present, but I don't think the work of this committee can and or should stop. I think that what we're doing is so critical and so important. And I know that people like to see a finish line, but for what's happening in our community, I don't think there's a finish line. I think that we have to continue to push the envelope, continue to ask the questions, continue to look at what is going on in our community. And I'd just like to say, I think this has been a great committee and I'm glad to be a part of it. But I think the work does not stop with making this report. I think we make the report, but hopefully we can continue, and that the mayor will look at this committee continuing to work, because as we work, we come up with recommendations, we look at what's happening on the ground, and then hopefully we'll be able to look at how it has resulted, what results we got from the recommendations that we put forward. Did the city act, and what happened as a result of what it is we put forward? And then maybe we can continue to give them additional information, because sometimes the legislative and the executive body can't see and don't hear all that we see and or hear.
I wonder if it might be helpful if we start writing the report, and then when if we see where there are holes in it or where we might need more information, or whoever's doing that, says, we need to get back and touch base on that. Because my sense is, to echo Representative Brown, this is such a voluminous amount of work that we could literally meet every day for the next 10 years and still be talking about some new aspect. But I do think at some point we've got to start to get a report together to give us a foundation to move forward. And then, and really, you know, maybe crystallize the areas where we do want to put the most of our energy right now. And then, you know, and I think we can put in the report that we think is, you know, to echo Representative Brown, this is such an important issue for the citizens of the city, and for the future of the city, that we think we should continue to meet and have more Zoom meetings, because we all need more Zoom meetings in our life. I also want to say, y'all, I love y'all, all y'all acting like TGIF, and David and I are like, yeah, we work on weekends. Just FYI.
Well, I just remind, regardless of we meet, we write, whatever, we still have a report that's due in our main chair's hands by the 30th of this month. So just throw that out there.
Yeah,
So there
I
is
think
some
that
sort
working
of
on the draft
engagement.
and then getting back together to review input from those drafts, I think is a good way to move forward.
Okay. That sounds
And
good.
I think that the last line of the report should be to be continued.
I like that. Because something that the other subcommittee co-chairs or vice chairs have talked about is that accountability piece. There has to be that accountability piece for all of this to move forward and have been worth our time. So this work continuing I think this commission has to be that accountability piece, and this subcommittee potentially continuing to do the work has to be that accountability piece for the city, I think. So I think that's important.
So we do need volunteers. So how about we Shayla was taking better notes than I. We'll get together. We'll send out our updated list of recommendations. We have some people that have got their names by some of the numbers, but we still have some places to fill. So if you feel your expertise is in PDR, that piece, certainly we would love for you to write that. And then, like I said, if we feel like that we need to reconvene to talk about our final report before we issue the final report, then we can do so. So I guess a lot of what we do in the near future will be via email and just discussing the report. Is everybody good with that? Okay.
And Rand, we meet, we'll figure out a deadline for folks to send us what you have, the piece you're working on. We'll get a deadline to you so that'll give us time to review, proofread, decide if we need to reconvene as a subcommittee again before we push it forward. So we'll figure that deadline out and let you know. Because we initially said, I think the 19th, but that's Wednesday. That's less than a week. So we'll figure out something, a deadline that's a little bit more realistic. So at least have some kind of a draft that we can pull together and review and give comments and feedback before we hand it over to the commission co-chairs.
And we'll resend the template out as well, because I'm sure in the volume of information that's being sent out, everybody has probably misplaced the actual template. So we'll make sure that gets sent out with our updated recommendations as well.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you all for a very productive meeting. Very, very productive. It's good discussion. We appreciate your time. Have a great weekend. Lori and Davey, you'll be in my prayers for successful services.
Thank you all. Thanks for pulling together our guests today too. That was really helpful.
It's good.
Not a problem. My pleasure. All right. Thank you all. Have a great lunch.
Bye.
See you.